The morning was calm, broken only by the distant hum of lawnmowers and the chirping of birds scattered across the suburban cul-de-sac. The neighborhood looked like something out of a real estate brochure. Neatly trimmed hedges, identical mailboxes, and front porches that could have been cloned from a single design template. But behind that pristine facade was an invisible web of control known to every homeowner. The HOA. It started with an envelope slipped under the door. No postage stamp, just a stark return address printed in block letters. Maplewood Estates Homeowners Association. The kind of envelope no one liked to see, because it never carried birthday wishes or neighborly greetings. Only fines, warnings, or threats dressed up in polite wording. Inside was a formal letter accusing the homeowner of violating community guidelines. The offense? Painting the front door a shade of deep navy blue instead of the approved dull beige. According to the HOA, this unauthorized modification disrupted the visual harmony of the neighborhood. Along with the warning came a staggering fine, several $1,000s, escalating with every day of non-compliance. The homeowner stared at the letter, bewildered. The paint wasn't neon or flashy. It was a classic, elegant color that any reasonable person would admire. Yet the HOA claimed it violated a rule buried in a 60-page covenant booklet most residents never fully read. It seemed absurd, even laughable, until the threat of legal action was spelled out in the last paragraph. As days passed, the HOA doubled down. Notices arrived in quick succession, each more aggressive than the last. They claimed they would place a lien on the property if the door wasn't repainted immediately and the fine wasn't paid in full. The homeowner's frustration grew with every letter, turning from confusion to anger. The neighbors whispered but stayed silent, too fearful of attracting the HOA's attention to offer any public support. This wasn't just about a door. It was about power, an HOA board that ruled with an iron fist, micromanaging everything from mailbox height to the color of seasonal wreaths. The HOA president, a sharp-tongued woman known for patrolling the neighborhood with a clipboard, seemed to take personal pride in issuing citations. Residents called her the sheriff behind her back, though never loud enough for her to hear. At first, the homeowner considered simply repainting the door to avoid the hassle. But something about the arrogance of the letters made compliance feel like surrender. Why should a personal choice about a front door color cost thousands of dollars? Why did this organization wield so much unchecked authority over private property? Instead of backing down, the homeowner began digging. The first step was reading through the HOA's own bylaws, the thick, tedious packet that most residents tossed in a drawer the moment they moved in. Late nights were spent combing through every section, highlighting passages, and cross-referencing rules about architectural conformity and aesthetic consistency. What emerged was a picture of an HOA that didn't always follow its own rules. Records of board meetings, publicly available but rarely reviewed, showed inconsistent enforcement of guidelines. Some board members had made changes to their own properties without proper approval. Different shutters, new mailboxes, even a driveway expansion that clearly required prior consent. If those changes slipped by without penalty, why was a door color suddenly a major violation? Suspicion turned into determination. The homeowner started documenting everything. Photographs of other houses with unapproved modifications, notes from public records, and screenshots of online listings showing illegal changes that had gone unpunished. Patterns of favoritism emerged. Properties belonging to friends of the HOA president often skirted the rules, while others were hit with disproportionate fines for minor infractions. The investigation grew deeper. County property records revealed that some HOA board members had liens placed against them in the past for unpaid taxes. A glaring hypocrisy for people now threatening others over community standards. There were even rumors of financial mismanagement, HOA dues being spent without proper documentation or competitive bidding. By the time another certified letter arrived demanding immediate payment of the door fine, the homeowner wasn't panicking anymore. The fear that once accompanied the HOA's threats had been replaced by quiet resolve. The door wasn't just staying blue. It was about to become the symbol of a much bigger fight. The plan was simple. used the HOA's own bylaws and public records to expose their hypocrisy. Every violation the homeowner found was carefully cataloged and prepared to be presented at the next board meeting, which residents were entitled to attend under the association's rules. What started as a personal battle over a door had evolved into a mission to hold the HOA accountable. Meanwhile, the president of the HOA seemed to sense that her usual intimidation tactics weren't working. She increased her patrols through the neighborhood, stopping in front of the house for extended periods, glaring at the door as if it had personally offended her. More letters arrived, each warning of imminent legal action if compliance wasn't met. But the homeowner was no longer intimidated. The blue door remained untouched, its color standing out boldly against a street lined with monotone beige. It was a small act of defiance, but it carried the weight of someone who had decided to fight back rather than fold under pressure. The next board meeting loomed on the calendar. It was supposed to be a routine affair, sparsely attended by residents who rarely cared about HOA politics. But this time, the homeowner planned to walk in with a thick folder of evidence, photographs, records, and documented rule violations committed by the very people who claimed to be upholding neighborhood harmony. If everything went according to plan, the meeting would mark the turning point. The HOA board would be forced to confront their own misconduct in front of the people they claimed to represent. And the president who had bullied so many might finally be forced to answer for her actions. The calm suburban facade of Maplewood Estates was about to crack. The days leading up to the board meeting ticked by slowly, filled with tension that could be felt every time the homeowner stepped outside. The blue door stood as a bold, defiant statement in a row of identical houses, drawing attention from passing cars and sideways glances from neighbors. Some smiled quietly, as if secretly cheering for someone to challenge the HOA's heavy hand, while others looked worried, afraid that even casual association might bring them under scrutiny. The HOA president, who had made it her personal mission to enforce every guideline to the letter, seemed to intensify her campaign. She walked the neighborhood with the precision of a drill sergeant, clipboard in hand, documenting every perceived imperfection. The door, in her eyes, was no longer just a violation. It was an insult to her authority. Her patrols slowed when she passed the house, and she often lingered just long enough to send an unspoken message. I see you. I'm not going away. Inside the house, the homeowner's investigation expanded like wildfire. The folder of evidence grew thicker with each passing day. Every evening was spent combing through HOA records, reviewing archived meeting notes, and searching county property databases for discrepancies. What started as a fight over a single fine was rapidly becoming a case study in corruption. Photographs documented glaring inconsistencies. Several houses had unapproved exterior fixtures, mismatched shutters, security cameras bolted to the front of garages, and even a few driveways that had been widened without permits. Some of these properties belonged to board members themselves. The hypocrisy was undeniable. Financial records uncovered through public filings painted an even darker picture. HOA dues, collected from every resident under threat of lien, were being spent with little transparency. Landscaping contracts were awarded to companies with personal ties to the president. Repair projects were billed at inflated rates, yet no receipts or competitive bids were on file. It became clear that the HOA operated less like a homeowners association and more like a personal fiefdom. The homeowner knew that confronting this at a board meeting would not be easy. The president was known for running meetings with an iron grip, silencing dissent by intimidating residents who dared to speak up. But the rules themselves, buried deep in the HOA's own charter, allowed any resident to present documented grievances. Armed with evidence, the homeowner prepared to do just that. In the meantime, the HOA continued its assault. A final certified letter arrived warning that legal action was imminent if the door was not repainted and the fine was not paid within 10 days. The language was sharp, designed to scare, but it no longer had its intended effect. Instead of panic, the letter fueled determination. The timing could not have been better. Those 10 days ended just before the upcoming board meeting. Word of the confrontation began to spread through Maplewood Estates. Neighbors who had once stayed silent started to whisper about their own grievances. Some had been fined for trivial matters: a flower pot in the wrong place, a basketball hoop visible from the street, or a holiday decoration left up too long. Many felt powerless but quietly admired the homeowner's refusal to back down. As the evening of the meeting approached, the homeowner rehearsed the presentation. The goal wasn't just to fight the fine, but to expose the broader pattern of abuse. The evidence was organized into clear sections: photographic proof of board violations, financial inconsistencies, and direct quotes from the HOA's own bylaws showing selective enforcement. It was airtight, the kind of case that couldn't simply be brushed aside with vague excuses. The night of the meeting arrived with an unusual buzz in the neighborhood. More residents than usual showed up, curious to see what would happen. The small community center, typically half empty during HOA gatherings, was filled with folding chairs and hushed anticipation. The president sat at the front table, flanked by other board members, her expression sharp and unyielding. She was used to running these meetings on her terms, with quick votes and minimal discussion. But this night would be different. The homeowner took a seat near the front, the thick folder resting on their lap like a shield. As the meeting proceeded through its usual agenda, maintenance updates, budget discussions, and routine votes, tension built with every passing minute. The confrontation loomed closer. Finally, the floor was opened for resident concerns. Normally, this portion passed quickly, with a few polite comments about streetlights or landscaping. But tonight, the homeowner stood, walked to the front, and placed the folder squarely on the table in front of the board. Every eye in the room turned to watch. The presentation unfolded methodically, laying out every piece of evidence in clear, irrefutable terms. The audience murmured as photographs of unapproved modifications appeared, many belonging to board members themselves. Gasps followed revelations of questionable spending and favoritism. The bylaws were read aloud, showing how the HOA president had ignored or bent the very rules she claimed to enforce. The president tried to maintain her composure, but her face tightened with every page of evidence presented. The room, once under her control, was now leaning heavily in the homeowner's favor. Other residents began to speak up, emboldened by what they heard. Complaints long buried under fear of retaliation started spilling out. The once invincible HOA board was suddenly on the defensive. By the time the homeowner concluded, the fine for the blue door seemed trivial compared to the storm now brewing. It was no longer about one violation. It was about systemic abuse of power. The board could no longer ignore the growing unrest. The president attempted to dismiss the concerns as misunderstandings, but her words rang hollow. Residents were no longer nodding politely, they were demanding accountability. The meeting ended without resolution, but it was clear the tide had turned. The HOA had been publicly challenged, and the president's authority had been shaken. As the crowd dispersed, whispers of organizing an official vote to remove board members began circulating. The homeowner walked home under the glow of streetlights, feeling a mix of exhaustion and exhilaration. The battle was far from over, but the momentum had shifted. The blue door remained exactly as it was, and now it stood for something much larger than personal preference. It had become the symbol of a community waking up to the reality of who was really running Maplewood Estates, and how long they had been getting away with it. The days following the explosive HOA meeting carried a strange mix of tension and cautious hope. For the first time in years, residents of Maplewood Estates were openly talking about holding the board accountable. Conversations that once happened in hushed tones over backyard fences now spilled onto sidewalks and driveways. People who had quietly endured fines and warnings began comparing stories. But the HOA president was not the type to retreat. Her carefully cultivated image of control had been publicly challenged, and she responded with predictable hostility. The neighborhood soon felt her retaliation, delivered in subtle, unmistakable ways. Inspection notices appeared on several properties within days, citing petty infractions. A hedge trimmed unevenly, a garden hose left visible, a minor oil stain on a driveway. Residents who had spoken up at the meeting were targeted first. It was clear the president was trying to reassert dominance by making examples of those who dared to support the homeowner who defied her. The blue door, of course, remained enemy number one. New violation letters arrived, thicker than ever, threatening escalating fines and even legal action. The HOA president seemed determined to break the homeowner's resolve before any formal vote to remove her could take place. Yet the homeowner had anticipated this move and was documenting every instance of harassment as carefully as before. Time-stamped photographs of letters, records of sudden inspections, and a growing list of neighbors willing to testify about selective enforcement. Behind the scenes, the homeowner worked tirelessly to build a broader coalition. Informal meetings were held in living rooms and garages, away from the HOA's watchful eye. Residents who had once been too intimidated to speak now voiced their frustrations openly. Stories emerged of fines issued for minor landscaping choices, threats made against elderly residents for leaving trash cans out too long, and even whispers of HOA funds being misused for personal expenses. The homeowner knew that gathering evidence was not enough. The next step had to be decisive. Under the HOA's own bylaws, a recall vote could be triggered if enough residents signed a petition demanding it. It wouldn't be easy. The president's loyal supporters would try to block it at every turn, but the momentum was building. Every new act of retaliation only fueled the community's anger. Meanwhile, the president doubled down on her intimidation tactics. She increased her patrols, circling the neighborhood in her car at odd hours, making her presence impossible to ignore. Sometimes she parked directly across from the homeowner's driveway, sitting silently, as if daring them to make the next move. The homeowner remained calm, at least outwardly. But inside, the pressure was mounting. There was no guarantee the recall effort would succeed. If it failed, the president would almost certainly come after them with renewed vengeance, possibly even through lawsuits funded by HOA dues. The stakes were no longer just about a door color, they were about the future of the entire neighborhood. Amid this escalating battle, a breakthrough came. A neighbor, who had long been quiet but observant, approached the homeowner privately with information that could tip the balance completely. She had kept detailed records of HOA spending over the past 3 years, including copies of invoices that didn't match the amounts reported at annual meetings. The numbers revealed gross discrepancies, tens of thousands of dollars unaccounted for, and contracts repeatedly awarded to companies owned by relatives of the president. It was the smoking gun the homeowner needed. If this information became public, it wouldn't just expose hypocrisy. It would point to financial misconduct serious enough to warrant removal from the board and possibly legal consequences. The challenge now was presenting it in a way that couldn't be buried or dismissed. With this new evidence, the homeowner finalized the petition to initiate a recall vote. Signatures poured in faster than expected. Many residents signed eagerly, angry at years of mistreatment, while others signed reluctantly but knew it was necessary to prevent further abuse. The homeowner made sure everything was done by the book. No shortcuts, no technical errors that the president could exploit to invalidate the petition. But as the recall effort gained traction, the president became increasingly desperate. Late one night, surveillance cameras captured her standing near the homeowner's front porch, peering at the door as if she were inspecting it for new ways to issue fines. The footage, grainy but clear enough, showed her trespassing on private property, another violation of the very rules she claimed to uphold. The homeowner now had more than enough ammunition. Between the financial records, photographic proof of selective enforcement, and video evidence of harassment, the case against the HOA president was overwhelming. The timing was perfect. The recall vote was scheduled, and the meeting to discuss it would be open to the entire community. Still, the president refused to back down. She mailed aggressive letters to residents, warning them that removing her would cause chaos in the neighborhood. She painted herself as the only person capable of maintaining order, appealing to those who feared change more than they resented her leadership. But these tactics no longer held the same power they once did. People were tired of being bullied. The evening before the recall meeting, the homeowner reviewed every piece of evidence one last time. The folder that once held a few photographs and notes had grown into a massive binder. It contained a complete record of the HOA president's misdeeds, ready to be shown to the entire community. There was no room for error. The presentation had to be flawless, factual, and undeniable. The air in Maplewood Estates felt electric on the day of the vote. Neighbors gathered outside the community center, speaking in low but determined tones. The homeowner arrived quietly, binder in hand, prepared for what would likely be the most important meeting the neighborhood had ever seen. The president sat inside already, rigid in her chair, scanning the room with cold eyes. She still believed she could intimidate her way out of this. But this time, the room would not bend to her will. The homeowner took a deep breath as the meeting was called to order. The evidence would soon be laid out for all to see, and the community would decide whether to stand with integrity or continue under fear. The moment of truth had arrived. The community center buzzed with a rare energy as residents of Maplewood Estates packed the small room to capacity. Folding chairs lined the walls, and even the hallway outside was filled with people craning their necks to see inside. The HOA had never drawn this kind of turnout before, but tonight was different. Tonight was the recall vote, a chance for the neighborhood to decide whether their long-feared president would remain in power. The president sat at the front of the room, rigid and defensive, her papers neatly stacked in front of her. Her eyes swept over the crowd like searchlights, as if daring anyone to challenge her. For years, those cold stares had been enough to silence dissent. But the atmosphere had changed. People were no longer avoiding eye contact. They were staring right back. The homeowner waited calmly in the front row, binder in hand, rehearsing every point in their mind. This was not about personal vengeance anymore. It was about proving, with irrefutable evidence, that the HOA president had abused her authority and betrayed the trust of the community. The blue door had simply been the spark that lit the fire. When the meeting began, the president attempted to take control as usual, reading from a prepared statement about neighborhood harmony and the importance of strong leadership. She painted herself as the protector of Maplewood Estates, warning that without her strict enforcement, property values would plummet and chaos would reign. But her words no longer carried the same weight. The murmurs in the crowd revealed skepticism rather than fear. When it was the homeowner's turn to speak, the room grew quiet. With steady hands, they opened the binder and began laying out the evidence piece by piece. First came the photographs, dozens of homes with unapproved modifications, many belonging to board members themselves. These images showed mismatched shutters, oversized mailboxes, driveway expansions, and security cameras installed without approval. The selective enforcement of rules was undeniable. Next came the financial records. Copies of invoices and contracts revealed glaring discrepancies. Landscaping services were billed at double the market rate, and all the contracts went to companies owned by relatives of the president. Maintenance funds were spent with no receipts, no competitive bids, and no explanations. The numbers didn't just suggest carelessness. They suggested deliberate misuse of HOA funds. The homeowner presented time-stamped letters documenting harassment, sudden inspections, and evidence of trespassing. The grainy surveillance footage showing the president standing on private property late at night drew gasps from the audience. The binder was more than a stack of papers. It was a record of years of abuse of power, methodically compiled and impossible to ignore. As the evidence mounted, the president's composure began to crack. Her usual icy calm gave way to visible frustration. She interrupted, tried to discredit the information, and accused the homeowner of spreading lies. But her outbursts only made her look defensive and desperate. Residents who had once cowered under her authority now looked on with disapproval and anger. One by one, other neighbors began to speak up, emboldened by what they were hearing. They shared stories of unfair fines, threats, and intimidation. Long simmering resentment spilled into the open. The president could no longer silence the room. The narrative she had controlled for so long was slipping away, replaced by a collective realization that the HOA had been serving her interests, not theirs. When the presentation ended, the evidence binder sat on the table like a gavel ready to pass judgment. The vote to recall the president was called. Ballots were distributed, and the room filled with the quiet sound of pens scratching paper. Even some of the president's closest allies on the board looked shaken as they marked their votes. As the ballots were collected and counted, tension filled the air. The president tried to maintain a facade of confidence, but her pale face betrayed her anxiety. She had ruled through fear for years, never imagining her authority could be challenged so effectively. When the results were announced, the room erupted. The recall vote had passed by an overwhelming margin. The president was officially removed from her position. She sat in stunned silence, her power stripped away in an instant. For the first time, the neighbors of Maplewood Estates saw her not as an untouchable figure of authority, but as a person who had overplayed her hand and been held accountable. The homeowner didn't gloat. This victory wasn't about humiliating one person. It was about restoring fairness to the community. The fine for the blue door was immediately voided, along with several other questionable fines issued to residents. But the story didn't end there. As the crowd celebrated, the homeowner's attention shifted to something more serious. The financial discrepancies uncovered during the investigation weren't just a matter of bad leadership. They could point to actual criminal wrongdoing. Thousands of dollars of HOA funds had gone unaccounted for. Contracts awarded to family members without proper approval could constitute fraud. The president's removal from office might not be the end of her problems. The neighborhood left the meeting that night energized, united in a way it hadn't been in years. Plans were already forming to elect a new board, one that would operate transparently and put the community first. For the first time in a long while, residents felt hopeful. The blue door no longer stood out as a symbol of defiance. It now represented a victory for everyone who believed in fairness and accountability. But while the homeowner walked home under the glow of streetlights, binders still clutched in hand, they couldn't shake the feeling that this wasn't truly over. The president, humiliated and furious, wouldn't simply disappear quietly. And the financial trail hinted at something deeper, something that might attract attention from more than just angry neighbors. The battle over a door color had evolved into a war over integrity, and the next chapter promised to be even more intense. The recall meeting had ended with cheers, but the days that followed were anything but calm. But while the community moved toward healing, the former president simmered with anger. She may have lost her official title, but she hadn't lost her bitterness or her desire for revenge. From the moment she left the community center in humiliation, she began plotting her next move. Even stripped of authority, she remained in the neighborhood, watching from her windows, driving past the blue door that had started it all. The homeowner stayed vigilant. The victory at the recall meeting was decisive, but it felt like only part of the battle. The financial records uncovered during the investigation pointed to something more serious than hypocrisy. They hinted at potential fraud. Thousands of dollars in HOA dues had disappeared over the years. Contracts had been funneled to companies owned by the president's relatives at double the market rate. There was no way to explain away numbers that didn't add up. Residents began demanding answers. A temporary board was put in place to conduct a full audit of the HOA's finances. The homeowner, now seen as a trusted voice in the community, helped coordinate the effort. Every receipt, every contract, every payment was scrutinized. The deeper they dug, the worse it looked. Funds intended for neighborhood maintenance had been siphoned off for miscellaneous expenses with no documentation. Payments were made to vendors who seemed to exist only on paper. As word of these findings spread, the former president's behavior grew erratic. She was seen driving slowly past homes where petition signatures had been collected, glaring at residents as they worked in their yards. Late at night, motion lights on several driveways flicked on unexpectedly, as if someone were prowling nearby. People began to feel uneasy again, wondering just how far she might go to protect herself. The homeowner documented everything carefully. Photographs, timestamps, statements from neighbors, just as they had done during the fight over the blue door. If the president tried to retaliate directly, there would be proof. But her tactics were more insidious. She began spreading rumors, claiming the homeowner had doctored evidence, that the recall vote had been rigged, that the real corruption lay with those who had exposed her. Despite these desperate attempts, the audit moved forward. The new board, under pressure from angry residents, hired an independent accountant to review the books. The results were damning. Tens of thousands of dollars were unaccounted for, with a clear pattern of self-dealing. What began as a neighborhood dispute was now serious enough to involve lawyers, and possibly law enforcement. The homeowner didn't celebrate. The findings confirmed what they had suspected, but they also brought an uneasy realization. This wasn't just about a power-hungry neighbor anymore. It was about criminal liability. The former president, cornered and humiliated, had every reason to lash out. Meanwhile, the neighborhood itself began to transform. With the president gone, residents no longer felt afraid to express themselves. Yards sprouted colorful flowers. Porch decorations returned. Conversations that had once been whispered now happened openly on sidewalks. The blue door, once a symbol of defiance, now stood proudly as a reminder that the HOA's power came from the people, not the other way around. But peace didn't last long. One morning, the homeowner woke to find a fresh violation notice taped to their mailbox. It wasn't official. The HOA no longer issued citations under the former president's authority, but it carried her unmistakable tone. It accused the homeowner of diminishing neighborhood standards and warned of serious consequences. It was a hollow threat, but it was also a sign she wasn't finished fighting. That evening, a neighbor reported seeing the former president walking around the homeowner's property line with a flashlight, muttering to herself. The harassment was becoming bolder, less concerned with being discreet. Several residents confronted her from a distance, but she simply retreated into the night, refusing to answer questions. The homeowner realized this behavior couldn't be ignored. They shared the incident with the new board and continued to compile evidence. If the former president escalated further, the police would need to be involved. At the same time, the audit results were sent to county authorities. What began as a fight over a door color was now a case study in HOA abuse that could lead to formal charges. The pressure mounted on all sides. The former president, once feared by everyone, now found herself isolated. Friends who had defended her on the board stopped taking her calls. Neighbors who once avoided eye contact now openly discussed her misconduct in the street. But isolation made her more unpredictable, not less dangerous. The homeowner remained calm and focused. They attended every board meeting, helped draft new transparent policies, and encouraged neighbors to keep speaking up. The temporary board began planning a full election to permanently replace the old regime. For the first time in years, Maplewood Estates looked forward to a future free of fear. Yet in the shadows, the former president was still scheming. She began hinting to sympathetic ears that she had dirt on the homeowner, suggesting she could turn the tables once again. Most people dismissed her threats as bluster, but the homeowner took nothing for granted. If she had fabricated rumors before, there was no telling what she might do next. The tension reached a new high when the county announced it would be conducting an official investigation into the HOA's finances. Investigators planned to interview residents, review bank records, and determine whether fraud charges should be filed. The news spread quickly, and for many in the neighborhood, it felt like long overdue justice was finally on the horizon. For the homeowner, however, it meant something else entirely. The conflict was entering its most dangerous phase. The former president had nothing left to lose, and a cornered opponent is the most unpredictable of all. One evening, As the sun dipped low and cast long shadows across Maplewood Estates, the homeowner noticed a car idling at the end of their driveway. It was her. She didn't get out. She just sat there, glaring through the windshield, before speeding off into the darkness. The message was clear. This wasn't over. The morning after the final hearing, the neighborhood was buzzing with whispers. The once imposing HOA president, who had wielded power with an iron grip, now avoided stepping outside. The homeowners who once feared her now openly questioned her authority. The board meeting minutes had been leaked, revealing how she selectively enforced rules, turned fines into personal threats, and ignored violations committed by her allies. The audit I initiated had uncovered more than simple hypocrisy. Financial records showed missing funds and questionable expenses. Landscaping invoices didn't match the actual work done, and maintenance fees had been funneled into projects that benefited only the president's close friends. Even worse, some of the fines collected from homeowners never reached the association's account. The treasurer, fearing legal consequences, resigned immediately, confirming that these irregularities weren't clerical errors. They were intentional. As these revelations spread, residents who had been quiet for years finally spoke out. Stories of intimidation, selective punishment, and threats of foreclosure surfaced like buried skeletons. My case, which began with a simple dispute over a door color, had opened the floodgates of resentment that had been building for years. The board could no longer ignore the growing calls for accountability. Soon, county officials stepped in to investigate. The president tried to frame the findings as misunderstandings, blaming others for the financial discrepancies. But the paper trail was too clear. Each transaction, each invoice, each falsified signature pointed to her. The investigation gained momentum as more neighbors submitted evidence. Emails, letters, even recordings of heated conversations where she admitted bending rules for the good of the neighborhood. Meanwhile, I stayed patient and quiet, watching the drama unfold. I didn't gloat, didn't confront her, didn't even change my door back to its original color. There was no need. The community itself had turned against her, and the law would handle the rest. The final blow came when the state's Homeowners Association Regulatory Board issued a formal notice. The president was removed from her position, and the HOA was placed under temporary state oversight until a new board could be elected. It was an unprecedented move for our quiet suburb, but given the scope of misconduct, it was inevitable. When word spread of her removal, relief swept through the neighborhood. Residents who had felt powerless now gathered on lawns, exchanging smiles and planning to attend the upcoming election. For the first time in years, there was hope for fair governance and transparency. The personal cost to the former president was immense. Not only did she lose her position, but she also faced civil charges for misappropriation of funds. Her once pristine reputation, built on appearances of authority and control, crumbled overnight. The same woman who had fined me thousands of dollars for a door color now stood accused of embezzling tens of thousands from the very people she claimed to protect. As for me, my fines were not only rescinded but refunded with interest. The HOA also issued a formal letter clearing my name, acknowledging that their actions were improper. It was more than vindication, it was proof that standing up to abuse of power, no matter how small the issue seemed at first, could lead to meaningful change. But this victory wasn't just mine. The entire community benefited. The new board, elected just weeks later, rewrote the bylaws to make them fairer and prevent abuses of power. Financial transparency measures were implemented, including quarterly reports and an open-door policy for meetings. No longer could someone use the HOA as a personal weapon against their neighbors. On the day the new rules took effect, I stood on my porch, looking at the door that had started it all. Its color was still the same unauthorized shade, but now no one dared to challenge it. What had once been a point of contention was now a quiet reminder that even the smallest battles could expose much larger truths. The former president eventually moved out of the neighborhood, unable to face those she had wronged. Her house sat empty for months before selling at a loss. People rarely mentioned her name anymore, as if erasing her legacy of intimidation was part of healing. For me, life returned to normal except with one important change. Neighbors now saw me not as the guy who fought over a painted door, but as someone who helped free them from years of HOA corruption. Some even stopped by to thank me personally. Others simply nodded in passing, an unspoken acknowledgement that justice had finally been served. In the end, the HOA learned a hard lesson. Power without accountability always backfires. And I learned that even when you're just one homeowner against a board of many, truth and persistence can turn the tables. The door stayed painted, the neighborhood became peaceful again, and the once feared HOA president became nothing more than a cautionary tale.